Welcome, everyone, to the NUFC 360 podcast. With me this week is the Northern football writer for the Daily Telegraph and Leyton Orient superfan, Luke Edwards. Welcome. Coming to us live from his Caribbean holiday home. He's got the bamboo behind him. How are you, Luke?
Yeah, I wish it was my holiday home. It's just it's a very, very hot and sweaty North Tyneside. But yeah, I'm good. It's been a good summer. I've relaxed. I'm looking tanned, refreshed, ready for the new season now. I'm not entirely sure Newcastle are though.
Yeah, that's one of the subjects we're going to touch on. Now, basically, because it's been a season when the takeover happened a couple of years ago. There were the bounded around names such as, Mbappe's and Haaland's and all the big players in the world. And it's become very apparent with new rules that that's not possible. But we didn't think it'd be this quiet. I mean, as a journalist, how have you found this summer in general and as a window as a whole?
I think this summer's been really to repeat Eddie Howe's comments. It's been a very difficult summer, I think, for journalists as well. I mean, I've covered Newcastle 21, 22 years now, and I think that week building up to the PSR deadline was the sort of journalistic equivalent of chasing smoke. Very, very stressful. I think. I used the word turmoil on social media, which people didn't like, but I think that was quite sort of accurate description of everything that was going on behind the scenes. Effectively, everybody was up for sale at that point. Obviously, there were players they didn't want to lose, hence why you suddenly saw the Alexander Isak links to Chelsea. Yeah. Never really a story, never really going anywhere, never going to happen, but it comes out anyway. You've then got the Anthony Gordon and Liverpool trying to get him on the cheap right at the end of the window. It was just very, very difficult to nail down exactly what was happening. And there was a sense of panic behind the scenes. I think Amanda Staveley's done an interview in The Athletic this week in which she has alluded to all that, but it was chaos really. And, patience was worn thin and tensions were high. I think there were a lot of disagreements. There are a lot of arguments. You're sort of getting wind of that, but not reporting it at the time. And then thankfully, having said all that, I mean, I was really worried. I think people at the club were really worried that they were heading for a 10 points penalty, basically, in the season would have effectively been over before it even started. I think we were 48 hours away from that happening. That last 48 hours, despite all the turmoil and the stress and the strain, they actually got out of it pretty well with selling Elliot Anderson, which I'm very sad about, and Yankuba and Minter, who I'm less sad about just because I'd never really seen him play. I'd seen some highlights of him playing for Feyenoord. I see he's now one of the world's best players for scoring.
That's got two bangers.
2 goals in pre-season against Japanese opposition, which I'd just like to add. What does that make Jacob Murphy?
Absolutely.
Who also scored 2 goals. So that was very, very difficult. And then, that came hot on the heels of that was the Paul Mitchell arrival. That caught everybody really by surprise. I mean, I was told he was the front runner. I think I wrote as much back in sort of about April, March time. Well, yeah, maybe March, April time. And he'd sort of distanced himself from it. So I hadn't really gone back to check that out. And then I think obviously with Amanda Staveley and Gadusi going and the sort of parameters of his job being a little bit more well-defined, he's obviously taken the job. And then I think people have to realise, Mark, when a new sporting director comes in, Newcastle had their short list of targets. They had who they were going to move for. They knew what positions they wanted to fill. Well, I think we all know that. It's a right-sided centre-back, it's a right-sided forward. They're the main priorities, and then see what else emerges. But those are the 2 positions they definitely want to fill. But when a new sporting director comes in who's, in charge of recruitment, that is very much his brief. It has to be a reset and almost start again. And I think that's why we've seen this big delay now. Of exactly who they're going to get. So we had Eddie Howe's. It wasn't an outburst in Germany. I was out there at Adidas HQ to speak to him, but it was concerning because it's the first time Eddie Howe would ever talk like that in that way. I thought it was very Rafa Benitez, if I'm honest. People disagreed with that, but I thought it was a very Rafa Benitez sort of using the media to make his feelings clear internally. I think that was difficult for Howe when Mitchell arrived. The circumstances of arrival coming very soon after Staveley had gone, him being left in the dark about it, and then not really knowing what his role in that job, in the new management structure was, and whether he'd still have a say on transfers. I think his red line was he wouldn't accept players that he didn't want. I think that's fair enough, but I think thankfully that's now all being worked through. But these are all problems they had to overcome before they got to actually deciding who they're going to sign. Now, I think they are close to making a signing. I've been told they're close. I'm hoping before the weekend. These words, it's always fluid. It might not happen, but that is what I've been led to believe, is that something will happen before the weekend. But you're trying to, you asked what this summer's like, and I know I'm talking for a while now, but
keep going.
Again, with a new sporting director coming in, everybody's out in Japan. I know people on social media are desperate for me to get a name. I've got a couple of names that I have to unfortunately keep to myself, just because I'm not 100% certain, and I don't want to write a name that isn't true. But trying to get anything out of Newcastle at the moment, again, new sporting directors come in. Everybody's, trying to keep it a very closely guarded secret, but I think they are close to something. I have an idea who it is, but again, I'm not 100% certain. So that's why I haven't released the name. But hopefully by the weekend.
Well, it's refreshing that you're keeping your cards close to your chest, because I don't think most people that report on Newcastle on X in particular like to throw every name out there, and then credibility wears thin very quickly on X. And even when people that are credible get hammered sometimes, where they go, you get the information they have, it goes out, and it doesn't happen because it's very fluid. Things don't go through all the time.
Yeah,
is it
transfers are never the hardest story to nail down as a journalist, because it is so fluid. I mean, what can be right in? So let's use the Dominic Calvert-Lewin story as an example. So yep. I wrote Newcastle are interested in Dominic Calvert-Lewin, I think, towards the end of last season. 100% correct, to the point where they were talking to Everton about signing him in June as part of that swap deal with Minter. But then within 72 hours of the interest emerging and they've made their move, it's gone because Everton are asking for too much money. So let's look at Malik Tor. I want to call him Four, I think.
We'll go with that.
But they are definitely interested in him. They have watched him for the last 2 years. They will have extensive knowledge of having played against him last season. They've scouted him regularly. There have been conversations. Does that mean he's the player that they're going to sign this week, or the start of next week? Is that the one that's most advanced? I just don't know for sure. So that's why earlier in the summer, I think it's kind of fine to put names that they're interested in out there. But when it gets down to like this kind of business end, I think I put it on myself to just try and get it correct, rather than it just be they're interested in a player. I want it to be who they're actually signing. So, as I say, I'm not in a position. I know it's infuriating for me, let alone everybody else. I'm just not in a position to say, yeah, this is definitely the player they're signing. And anyone who tells you on social media in particular who they are definitely going to sign doesn't know. It's educated guesswork, I'm afraid. So that's why I'm as frustrated as anyone. It's been a very annoying week in that respect, but sometimes we just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I think the way the club operates, it's been clear that they will get a deal done very quickly. Names that have been bandied around. I think with the Isak deal, it was early on, a lot of noise about him, then it went quiet, and then just bang at the end, got him straight in. So it must be difficult, as I say, getting the news in when it moves that quickly. With the positions, the only position that I've seen a lot of news on is the right-sided centre-back. Because it's not as a sexy position as the right winger forward that we need. If you were a betting man, is it the centre defender that we're closer to or more likely to sign? Because the forwards seem to have gone really, really quiet.
Yeah, I think so. But again, I don't know 100%. I mean, I know right-sided centre-back and right-sided forward are the positions they definitely want to fill. Now, I think the caveat of that right-sided forward is I think they, depending on what happens with Wilson's, if Wilson was to leave, they'd sign another centre-forward.
Yeah,
this is why it's always so fluid. But if Wilson's staying and he's currently injured again, the likelihood of somebody signing him when he's injured is pretty remote, bearing in mind he's been pretty much injured now all year. So I think they would quite like a right-sided forward who can play through the middle. which therefore gives you the versatility of having 3 players plus Gordon who can play through the middle, but then still having Isak as your main centre forward. It's very difficult to, unless you're playing in the Champions League and you've got loads and loads of money, like the really rich, the truly rich clubs have got, to sign another front line elite level centre forward, because it's very difficult to say to somebody, okay, we'll pay 60 million for you, but you're going to be second choice to Alexander Isak at a club like Newcastle that can't offer European football. So it's very difficult to do that sort of deal. So the right-sided forward is still there. I think the names that are out there, I think they are on the shortlist. They were certainly on the shortlist. Whether Mitchell has come in and brought any new suggestions, I suspect he may well have done. But I think the names that are circulating out there are the names that are kind of on the shortlist. But you've referenced the Isak deal there. I think Newcastle kind of view that as their perfect transfer in a way. Yes, the interest was there, but if you remember, I remember it very, very well. July 2022, I wrote that they wanted Isak. There's a universal, he was like the universal choice of everybody involved in the recruitment team. And then within 24, 48 hours, oh no, he's too expensive. And that was what was briefed to everybody, not just me. He's too expensive. But then, as you say, August, out of the blue, bang, deal done. I think they are trying to pull off that sort of deal again.
Yeah, and that's the only reason why I'm not losing my head yet, because in transfer windows gone by with different owners, it's kind of sailed by, and it's we've got no one in, maybe a loan at the end of the window. I will always hold out hope until the end of the transfer windows with the new owners that we have.
Yeah, sorry, Mark. I was going to say the other thing to reference is they are doing this. We haven't got much money to spend stuff again, so that is being briefed. That has been briefed in pretty much every summer window since the takeover happened. But I think fans do have to be realistic. They are not going to get into that sort of position with PSR that they did this summer. They do not want to be there again because, as I said at the top of this interview, the stress and strain that caused, the fear of that points penalty. So I think they are going to be careful. And again, the problem is they haven't found the buyer for Wilson. We don't know about Trippier. We keep being told he's going to leave, but no sign of a move coming. They've still got Almiron. They've still got Dubravka. They've still got Isaac Hayden. They've still got Ryan Fraser. These are all players that are still on the wage bill. So I think outgoings are just as important as incomings. I think they will do one deal, but then I think it will probably go quiet again until they can try and get some players out. And I think if they can't get any of those players out, then it is going to severely limit what they're going to be able to do, not just because of the transfer fees they bring in. It's about the wage bill. And now the wage bill is getting higher and higher in terms of ratio to turnover. Yeah. So that is a problem for them as well. And I don't think you can underestimate that. It's very easy for us all to sit at home and say, sign someone. Come on, you've got the money. You're in a new PSR cycle. But they've got to reduce that wage bill down as well to free up the room to play the really top wages for the sort of players that are going to improve the squad. Now, getting rid of players, sorry, I'll rephrase that, selling players at Newcastle has been a huge, huge problem, not just under these owners, but if you go back, when Steve Bruce was manager, every single player pretty much was up for sale. They didn't get a single bid for anyone, I think, in the 2.5 years that he was Newcastle manager. A lot of those players are still there. And this is a problem. And until they can start selling players better than they have done, then it's going to be harder to bring players in. That's just the world of PSR.
And what do you think is the main factor for the club being so poor at selling? And I remember, if this is true or not, there was a bid accepted for Almiron in the January window. The player turned it down. Is that because of wages? What do you think they're struggling with the most?
I'm not sure it was ever as advanced as a bid was made. I don't think a bid ever actually came in. I think Almiron had signalled that he was reluctant to go. I think he still is reluctant to go. They're not. It's just having the quality of players. Now you have to ask yourself. It's very easy to sell a Gordon. It's very easy to sell a Bruno. It's very easy to sell an Isak. If Botman was fit, it'd be very easy to sell a Botman. But it's this balancing act between wanting to keep your best players, who just happen to be the easiest players to sell. Now, what happened in June was they got so close to the deadline that they had to reluctantly, in a panic, consider at least consider the possibility that they might have to sell an Isak or a Gordon. It was never going to be Isak. I don't. When I say consider, they just had to have those conversations. You know, if Liverpool were willing to pay 90 million for Gordon at that point with 48 hours to go, then they had to at least take that conversation, have that conversation with Eddie Howe. At some point, they are going to have to sell one of those players. Now, I don't think that will be this summer now. I think all the big names will stay. But at some point, fans are just going to have to get used to the idea that they're going to have to sell players they don't want to see leave. Now, you know, Dan Ashworth, when he was sporting director, was not in a huge rush to give Joel Linton a new contract, because in the back of his mind, he's thinking, well, there'll be a market for Joel Linton in the summer, and he's going to want massive wages, and he got massive wages. Yeah. So he's one of the top earners, but then that is all a PSR calculation now. So they've kept their best players, but that means it does limit them and what they can do in terms of recruitment. And people have to understand that. I know it's frustrating, it's irritating, but that is the profit and sustainability rules that are handcuffing clubs of Newcastle size with their revenue streams. In exactly, you know, and it makes it very, very hard to find players within budget who are going to improve your first team. And we've just got to accept that it's taking a bit longer than we all hoped, but they do have to get the right players, and the pool of players that they can move for within budget, who they can pay the wages and the fee, who want to come, is very, very small. And they've got this limited pot. I'm not going to put a figure on the pot because I think that's dangerous, but they have got they do have a budget. Do you know what I mean? It's not a finite amount of money that they can just spend. It's not the fantasy world of the takeover when it happened, when we thought they were just going to be the next Manchester City. It is impossible for them to behave like Manchester City did and Chelsea did, and Chelsea continue to do so.
Yes.
It's impossible for them to do that. So they're having to stretch what money they have, which will still be a sizable amount of money, don't get me wrong, but they're having to stretch that as far as they possibly can go, whilst also desperately trying to get rid of some of the dead wood, some of the players they don't want, to make room in the wage budget and the squad for.
Yeah, and I think I can already see in my mind, if an Isak's to leave, if a Bruno's to leave, if a Gordon's to leave, the meltdown in the fan base. However, I will caveat this with, so far, every move, or the majority of the moves that the club have made, you know, since the takeovers happened, has seemingly worked out or has been done in the best interest of the club. Like Minter's gone. I personally didn't want to see him leave, just because it's always exciting to see a youth prospect. But if we sold Elliot Anderson and Minter for nearly £70 million, that's a great amount of money. And I trust the club to bring in people like Paul Mitchell to get the recruitment side right. We're buying a lot of young players. We've got a manager I feel can improve players like Sean Longstaff. I didn't think could be, you know, as influential in a Premier League team as he actually has turned out to be. And he's elevated, I think, a lot of players in the team. So I think fans need to remember where we were and where we are, and the people that we've got in the club now.
Yeah, we're at that stage of the summer, though, where everybody wants signings. That's all anybody's interested in. So everybody's judging the health of the football club. Not everybody, but a lot of people are judging the health of the football club and the hopes for next season based on signings. Now, they haven't done enough. I'm trying very hard to be patient and give them that time, because the window still has, you know, a long time to run. I mean, it still has, at least 5 weeks left, I think. The market is slow. It is slow. Liverpool haven't done anything. Tottenham haven't done anything. Not of note anyway. So there's a lot of clubs haven't done a lot yet. It's always like a log jam. You need one, you know, deals will start going through. It will happen, but we've also got to remember that, yeah, as you say, I trust them. There's only one transfer really that you can question, and that's the Tonali one, just because of what happened with the gambling ban. But he will be available next season. That improves them. As long as they can keep players fit, keep Joe Willock fit, keep Harvey Barnes fit. Obviously, the names we've all mentioned, we all know who the key players are. If they can keep them fit, they have got a squad that is good enough to finish in the top 6. But, you know, I would feel a lot more comfortable, as well every single supporter, about those top 6 chances if they can fill these 2 positions that they know they need to fill, which is right-sided forward and right-sided centre-back.
Yeah. And then moving away from transfers, looking at the season moving forward, assuming we do get the transfers done that we need, you've touched on it there. What is the goal for Newcastle next season? And where do you see with a normal amount of injuries caveated, where should we be finishing? And would Eddie Howe be under any pressure to achieve that target?
I think it will be top 8 again for me. I said top 8 at the start of last season. You have to. I know it's difficult to look at a wider context when you're only concerned about your club, but in my job, it is important to try and look at the wider context. If we talk about the traditional Big Six, who were all richer than Newcastle, still, can still spend more money than Newcastle on wages and transfer fees. That's just a simple fact. If we add Newcastle and Aston Villa to that, that is what I think now we should consider as a big 8. That I know Sky have caused a bit of a stir by describing it as a big 7 with Newcastle in it. You've got to put Aston Villa in that as well, because they're in the Champions League next season, as Newcastle did the previous year. Got a very good manager, and they've also got very, very wealthy owners who are very, very ambitious. So I think you've got 8 clubs now at the start of every season who will think we could get Champions League football. So that's fine. But you've also got 4 clubs who are going to miss out on Champions League football. I would say Newcastle are one of the favourites to miss out on the top 4. I think if you consider that Manchester City and Arsenal are 2 of the 4 gone already.
Yep, agreed.
I know the great unknowns are going to be Liverpool with a new manager, Chelsea with a new manager, but Manchester United are spending money. Tottenham will spend money. I would argue that all of the Big Six had better squads than Newcastle last season. And I suspect that will continue to be the case. We don't know until we see who these at least 2 new signings are going to be this summer. But then you're suddenly thinking, okay, well, top 6. I think top 6 will be a great season for Newcastle. I think that would be brilliant. Hopefully, domestic cup runs. I'm really annoyed they're not in Europe, because I think that competition, the Europa Conference League, would have been perfect for them.
I love it. Yeah, me too.
Because it would have got them used to playing in Europe, but you can rest players, you can rotate. So what happened last season is they were hammering the same pool of sort of, and then the injuries start to hit, and then they're hammering an even smaller pool, playing them, midweek and at the weekend. So, but that will keep them fresher. So I think I will say top 6, but I think top 8 would still be acceptable for the wider context that I've given. Is you have 8 clubs, 6 of whom are a lot richer than Newcastle and already have better squads. I think Newcastle's and Villa's squad is probably comparable, similar. Villa did what Newcastle did the previous year. I think top 8 would be acceptable, but I think if Newcastle are mid-table and out of the domestic cups, in the late winter, early spring, then I think we might see Eddie Howe under a bit of pressure. But until then, I don't think so. You will once again have lots of noise from outside of the club, stirring it up, saying he's under pressure. You'll have lots of people talking about if Pochettino's out of work. You will still be reading stories about Pochettino's wanted by Newcastle. I don't think that is the case. I'm not saying Pochettino wouldn't be wanted by Newcastle, but I think you need to ignore that. There's been all that stuff written about Eddie Howe. I think he's done a phenomenal job. And I think last season for me was almost, I know it's ended in disappointment, but if you look at the season collapsed in December when they had 12 players, basically, in the busiest month of the year, when they lost that Carabao Cup quarter-final to Chelsea, when they were knocked out by Milan in the Champions League and ended up missing out on the Europa League because they were going for the win. The season collapsed then. I think if you look at it either side of that injury-plagued winter, which was awful, and they really struggled, the defeats to Nottingham Forest, Luton, there were others, Bournemouth. Apart from that sort of 6 weeks period, it was actually pretty good again, and they finished the season very strongly as well. I don't think he's under any pressure, and I think he deserves at least another season, I would have said, to see where he can get them. But football is brutal, and if they're mid-table and not done anything in the domestic cups, then I would imagine he would start to come under some pressure at sort of 2025. But I don't think he will be until then, at the very, very earliest.
Yeah, I'm glad you've said that, because I completely agree. Again, I think people have very short memories in football of where I've mentioned already where we were and where we are, and everything is with context. I've heard people, again, outside of Newcastle fan, saying how we came bottom of our group. We were an incorrect handball in the last minute against PSG away from not being bottom of our group. And again, as you say, hammering the same 11 players every single week in, week out, 2 or 3 times is unsustainable. And hopefully that won't happen again. I agree. I think a top 8 finish is realistic And I would like to see a cup run. I don't care which cup it is. I'll take any cup. League Cup, FA Cup would be obviously the priority. But I think, yeah, I'm glad you've said that. And just before we go, I know we've mentioned Eddie Howe. I think he's done a sensational job. I know you're a big fan of Eddie Howe as well. England, I've seen, haven't made an official approach, but I know there was a lot of touting of him going.
Mm-hmm.
Should Newcastle fans now be confident that he is staying?
I think, yes. I mean, I think as things stand now that they've had this tension and these early teething problems in the new relationships, which I think, almost if you take a step back again, is kind of understandable. Mitchell has to come in and be, I'm the man, I'm the boss. There's bound to be a bit of conflict there, just a bit of friction, shall we say. Now that all seems to have been smoothed out, I think all the noises from Howe have been that he would stay. It's always been my understanding that, I know he said this, words to this effect, but as long as he's happy at Newcastle, and I think he is again, then he would turn down England. Now, I think if you're the Football Association, what I would do is I would just wait. They don't have to rush. They can employ. They've only got the Nations League to worry about. Let's be honest, no one really cares. They can put an interim manager in charge in the autumn, and they can just wait and see what Eddie Howe's situation. Will he remain happy? Is he going to get to September and the transfer window shuts and he's not going to be happy? Has he, will he have been given players he doesn't want? Will there be more friction? They will just have read those comments from Howe with interest. And I think they will just sit back and wait and just assess their options again. They can hide behind a thorough recruitment process and say that they're looking at all potential candidates. They would be mad not to be interested in Eddie Howe. He is the outstanding domestic candidate. If they want to go English, then they've got to make a move for Howe. So I think that's why they will wait. But I don't see any reason why Howe would leave. I'm very confident he will stay, as long as there isn't a spanner in the works in terms of his relationships breaking down with people at the club. Everything he has said in public is accurate. He wants to stay at Newcastle. He's only thinking about Newcastle. And I think having spoken to him privately, we do get the chance to talk to him privately as well. And then what he said in public, I think he would struggle with the England job. The lack of contact with players, it doesn't really draw on his strengths as a manager. I think he would consider himself to be a little bit too young for it at the moment, and he values that day-to-day contact with players too much. I think he would struggle with the attention of the England job as well. We know he's a very private man who doesn't like the spotlight. I don't think he would enjoy being photographed out, for example. I don't think he would enjoy the statesman, almost a politician that Gareth Southgate was when he's asked about things going on in the society and the world. We've seen with the Saudi Arabian ownership and the controversy about that. Howe was not engaged with any of that. But I don't think he would get away with that with England. I think he would be sort of boxed in. And I think he would be wary of all of those things. So I'm very confident that he will stay. But again, as you have to do, if things go south at Newcastle and the window ends badly, he will probably make it clear he's unhappy, and then the FA would probably make their move and just test it, just test that resolve. But I think Newcastle would resist any approach, certainly at the moment. Anyway, Darren Eales is on the record saying that they would turn down any approach. So I think we'd have to go. There's a lot of sort of stepping stones to leap to get into a position where Eddie Howe would be at risk of going to England. I don't think we're anywhere near them at the moment.
Fantastic, because that's exactly what I want to hear. As long as players aren't leaving and Eddie Howe's not leaving, I think a lot of Newcastle fans will be happy. But we do need those one or two transfers, and I hope you're right, Luke. I'm really looking forward to seeing anyone sign. Would be great before the transfer window's done.
Someone will. Well, look, people are going to come, but we just, I'm not the most patient of people. As anyone will know me, will tell you, I'm fighting it at the moment. I am fighting it, but as I say, I fed a little bit into the public domain via Twitter, just saying I think something is close. Now I might be wrong, and then if you ask me again next week, I think my patience will have snapped, and I think I would be getting a bit angsty and putting a bit of pressure on the club and asking those sort of tougher questions about what's going on, but. for now, I'm pacified enough to just trust that I think they are close to doing something. Whether that's by the weekend or the start of next week, we'll have to wait and see. But I think they are. I think they are getting there.
Brilliant. Well, I've got my fingers crossed for a right winger, because when the takeover happened, that was the first position on my list. It's still 3 years on almost, and it's still the same two. Though God love both of them, but I think if we can get an Anthony Gordon on the right hand side, would be a force of reckoning. But Luke, thank you very, very much for your time this evening. Really do appreciate you, taking you away from the Caribbean Sea. And I'm going to leave you to get a pina colada. And thank you again. Enjoy the rest of the transfer window.
Thank you. Cheers, Mark.